Hello, we are going to be looking at the greatest sermon ever given. It was a sermon by Jesus. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's located in Matthew chapter 5 through chapter 7. An amazing sermon. We're just going to take one little part of it today and look at just like a paragraph of what Jesus said. Now, before we get started and before I read those verses, which is going to be Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 through 16, before we do that, I want to explain what Jesus is doing by sharing with you a story from my own life. This is an illustration, I believe, that will fit very well into the overall picture of what Jesus is trying to do in this paragraph. So this is a story from my life. When I was in second grade, I was a poor student. In contrast to that, my mother was an excellent student. All growing up, she did very well in school. But in second grade, I struggled. And one day, I brought home a report card to have my mother sign it. You had to have your parents sign report cards in those days. And so I brought my report card home, and it was D's and F's. And she looked at that report card, and she told me this story many years later. She said to me, or I said to her, "Mommy, how did I do?" And my mom said, "Oh, Brent, you're so smart. You're so intelligent. You're really bright. You do so well in school." And I smiled, and I went out to play. And she told me many years later this story, and she said, and after I left the room, she started to cry, thinking, oh, this son's doing terrible. And with her help, the next year, I did a lot better. And the next year after that, with her help, I did a lot better. And the next year after that, I did better. And the next year after that, I did better. And in high school, I got mostly A's and a few B's. And when I finished college, after 4 years at college, I was graduated with a 4.0 GPA valedictorian. But when I was in second grade, when all that my mom could see was the failure, the D's and the F's, she spoke into my life what she knew was potential. She spoke into me, "You are going to do great. You're smart. You're intelligent." No one else could see that probably at the time, but she could. She spoke those words of faith, and it affected me. It helped me. That's what Jesus is doing. Think of your own life. Maybe you weren't a very good student like I was as a child, and maybe you had a teacher that really believed in you and thought, no, you could do it. And they pushed you a little bit, and you became a better student because of them. They maybe were an English teacher or a math teacher or a science teacher, and because of their love for this subject, and because they made it exciting, and they thought, you can do it, and you're good in this area, you got a love for that area. That happened to me in the subject of history. I had a great history teacher. And that teacher motivated you to become better than you thought you were. Maybe it wasn't a teacher for you. Maybe it was a coach. I've talked to many of my friends who had an experience like this, where they went into this particular sport, that particular sport, and at first they didn't think they were any good at it. But the coach saw something in them and put them in a key position in that sport, trained them, motivated them, pushed them to become better than they ever thought they could be. And they started to excel. They got better and better and better at that particular sport. And they went on to win awards and win all kinds of championships because of that great coach who believed in them and saw in them something they didn't see in themselves. Or maybe for you it was a music teacher. Maybe you got some music lessons, and that teacher just said a few words. Something like, "You are a natural at this. You are gifted. This is your thing. You have this ability." A few words like that. I've heard many stories of people, just a few words like that, motivated them and got them all into music, and they play to this very day. And they've done all kinds of things in music because of that inspiration, because of someone pointed out to them something they didn't see in themselves. It can happen with a job. There's been bosses. Maybe you can think in your life. Did you ever have a boss like this who really trusted you, who believed in you? Maybe you were insecure. Maybe you were new. You really didn't know what you were doing. But they saw in you something you didn't see in yourself. And they gave you that responsibility. They gave you that project to do. They said, no, this is you. You do this. And you did it, and you did a great job. And you got more confidence, and you said, wow, I'm good at this. I can do this. You can have a boss like that speaks into your life like my mom spoke into my life and encouraged me, and then you grow and you rise to the occasion. That can happen in all different fields. That's what Jesus is doing in this passage. He's speaking into our lives something we don't see in ourselves. He's telling us who we are. Even though we might not feel it or we might not think it's possible, he's telling us as followers of him who we are. So listen carefully to this passage from the greatest sermon ever given. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. I'm just going to read from Matthew chapter 5, verse 13 through 16. Listen up, this is great. You are the salt of the earth. Did you catch that? I'm just going to say it again because he's telling us something powerful here. He's telling us who we are. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. You are the light of the world. Did you catch that? Okay, I'm going to say it again. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. Wow, I want to talk about this. First of all, I want to talk about salt, all right? Morton, I salt. Here we are. And we're all familiar with salt, a very common thing. And we usually use it on food. But salt has other qualities. It has other things it does. I'll just tell you three that I think Jesus is referring to when he says, you are the salt. I like to think of us as salt shakers, right? Salt shakers. Well, three things. First of all, salt brings flavor. It brings the flavor out of the food, right? So that's like us. Jesus is saying, you are the salt of the earth. What he means is that you're going to bring the good out of the earth. You're going to bring good taste. You're going to bring good flavor out of the activities that you're involved in. Wholesome things. You're going to bring the goodness out of the situations that you're in. That's the first. The second is that salt is used in meat. It salts meat. And it can preserve meat, right, from rotting. They used to use it in the old days for that kind of thing, and probably still today in some places. So it is a preservative. How are Christians like that? We are keeping evil at bay. We are keeping the society from rotting. So we're keeping a moral attitude with everywhere we go. So that's another effect that we're having on the world around us and the people around us. Just our influence is one of keeping it from going downhill, from becoming immoral, from going down the tubes, right? So that's the preserving aspect of the Christian life. And there's a third one. Sometimes when I get a sore in my mouth, I will gargle with salt water. And it'll get rid of that sore throat, it'll get rid of that sore. It has a purifying effect. And that's another quality that we have. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. Because of that, you are going to be purifying the things around you. That your life, the way that you act, is going to be wholesome and holy and righteous and good. And that's going to have an effect on those around you. Those that are sick and those that are going the wrong direction, they're going to feel that. and they're going to go, oh, I'm uncomfortable with that, and I need help, and we're going to be that effect on people, that purifying effect. And so that's part of it. Now, I want to point out something in this verse. It's interesting in the Greek. So if you study the Greek structure of the sentence, you are the salt of the earth, the emphasis is on the word you. You are the salt of the earth. That's what Jesus is emphasizing. He's talking to his disciples. He's talking to his followers, and he's telling them personally, directly, you are the salt of the earth. Now think about that. He's not saying, it's like my mother, right? Like my mother saying, you're smart, you're intelligent. We might not think, oh, we're not, the purifying element. I'm not really salt. But that's not what Jesus is saying. He's not saying you need to become salt. He's not saying someday you will be salt. He's stating a fact. Right now, you are salt. Why? Because we're connected to Jesus. Because of our connection to him, because we're following him, we are automatically salt. You're going to have this automatic effect, a wonderful effect of good, of God's goodness, of God's preserving and purifying influence is going to be automatic. You are salt. You are right now. He's speaking into our lives. He's speaking of the potential that we have. And as he speaks these words to you, accept them and go, I am salt. I am salt. It'll build you up. And you'll start acting like it. So it's a great thing. You are salt of the earth. Now there's more to it. He goes on in the verse. And let me put it this way. Can a Christian lose his or her saltiness? Yes. You can lose your salt. Jesus says it right there, right? A Christian can be following Jesus and then get so influenced by the world that they become just like the world. It's sad, but it's a truth. And Jesus warns us against this. And so the idea here is that you've maybe heard the term carnal Christian. There are people that have been following Jesus, but they buy into the world system. They become just like all the non-believers around them. They act like the non-believers. They think like them. They talk. They have the same attitudes. It's terrible. It's really sad. These could be referred to as, carnal Christians or baby Christians or lukewarm Christians, spoiled rotten Christians, or just they're immature, or they're worse than that. And this one sermon I was reading called these type of people POWs. Prisoners of the world, POWs. And he says they've been captured by the value system of the world. The love of money, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. These things have captured them, and they have given up following Jesus, and they've become just like the world. They might claim to be a Christian. They might even go to church. But they are living on the same level and with the same value system as the world around them. And what does Jesus say about them? It's not pretty. He says, God can't use you anymore. Nope. You're like salt that's lost its saltiness, and you're not good for God. You're just going to be thrown out, walked over. Yeah, that's a warning. That's a serious warning. So Jesus builds us up, says, you are the salt. But then he says, watch out. Don't lose your saltiness. Keep following after me. And I'm encouraging you to do that. You keep being moral and righteous. You keep being kind and good to people and caring. You keep those qualities. Don't lose those. Don't become like the world around us. We're to be in the world, but not of the world. You got that? So that's the first one, salt. Now, the second one that he talks about here is you are the light of the world. So I brought my little flashlight, all right? You are the light of the world. And of course, light's so important. I don't need to talk about the importance of light. It's really hugely important in so many areas. But when he talks about you are the light of the world, Jesus is referring to God's work, God's truth, God's values, and God's word, and God's goodness going out to people. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about being a light to the world. And think about this. What a great compliment. because Jesus said of himself, I am the light of the world. That's what Jesus said. And here he's saying, you are the light of the world. Think about that. Jesus is really the light of the world. We are really mirrors. That's what we are. We are followers of Jesus, and we are to reflect his light. We are reflect his light. Think of this. The moon reflects the sun's light. And we are to reflect the sun's light. S-O-N. The sun's light. And that's what we do. So he's building us up. And again, in Greek, the emphasis is on the you. You are the light of the world. He's talking to his followers. And he's building us up. You, personally, you, I believe in you. It's like a coach that really believes in you. And it's down to the last minute or maybe the last few seconds. And it's maybe if it's basketball, he says, pass it to you. Pass it to this. And he believes in you. You take the last shot. You're going to win the game for us. Yeah. Or it's maybe football and we're going to give the ball to you. You're going to run in for the touchdown. Or in soccer, it's the last penalty shot. And I'm putting you out there. I believe in you. This is your moment. This is your time. I know you can do it. And that's what Jesus is saying to us. He believes in us. He knows that we are going to carry on his light. We're going to reflect his light to the world around us. It's a great compliment. It's really powerful. Light is the goodness of God. And he's talking specifically about good works, good deeds. So he says in this, a city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Right? You pull out a flashlight, you want it right out in front where you can see things. You don't hide it. You don't put it in your pocket. You want to see where you're looking here, where this is going to help me. And that's what that is referring to, is our good deeds. Good deeds is that you're going to be helping people in all kinds of ways. That's what we do. As followers of Jesus Christ, we help the poor. As followers of Jesus Christ, we care about those that are hurting. We bring healing to the hurting, and we care about the lonely. We help people out in all kinds of ways, doing good deeds, feeding the poor and the hungry, and going on mission trips to help people in need all over the place. That's what we do. We are light. We're the light of the world. It's a great thing. It's part of the nature of being a follower of Christ. And he says, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. Jesus will teach a little bit later on in the same sermon about not doing good deeds to get self-glory, right? So there's a careful way. You don't want to do good deeds and then brag about them and point to yourself. You just want to do them naturally. That's what Jesus is saying. Don't hide them. But he also says, and a little bit later, he says, when you give to the needy, give in secret. Right? So there's a sense of there's appropriate ways to do your good works. So I just throw that in to balance out. It's not about you and brag, hey, showing off. But Jesus says it's just natural. You're going to do good works wherever you go. If you're at work, if you're at school, playing, working in the store, wherever you are, you're bringing the presence of God. You're bringing the goodness of God. You're just helping people. You're being kind everywhere you go. You're the light. You're the light of the world. It's so encouraging. And then there's this last phrase here, and that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. I love that word Father. Hear how he threw that in? And Jesus often refers to God as Father. That's another great thing to put into your mind as to who you are. You are in the family of God. You are a son or a daughter of God. God is your Father. Now, that's so much being built up. You're a salt, you're light, you're a member of God's family. Shouldn't that change how you behave? If you know who you are, it affects how you live. I want to give you an illustration of this. This is just from my own family. I know every family is different, so I'm just trying to illustrate the point here. But in my family growing up, I had very strong Christian parents. And they raised us with moral values. And in our family, as I was growing up, if I ever used a swear word or even the C word, my mom would say, no, we don't do that. We don't say those things in our family. That's inappropriate. That's out of bounds. You're a Williams. We don't do that. Oh, okay. Or if I was mean to someone, my mom would say, no, we don't do that. That's not allowed in our family. We don't do that. Stop it. But if I did something good and kind to someone, she would praise me. Yeah, good boy. That's what we do in our family. That's the kind of behavior we have in our family. We're Christians, we're Williams, and that's what we do. All right? So that's the environment I was raised in. This is what you do. This is what is expected. If you know who you are and you feel like you belong to Christ, that you're a member of God's family, you act a certain way. And that's what Jesus does in the rest of his sermon. He goes on to say, here's a whole bunch of ways that we act in God's family, and they're hard. Jesus goes on and says, hey, love your enemies. Turn the other cheek. When someone's mistreating you, you just be nice back to them. He tells us all these things about the rules of this family, but the point I'm trying to make is that you can follow those rules because you know who you are. You know who you are. You are light. You are salt. You are a member of God's family. And that gives you the power and the ability to view life differently and to follow all those very difficult rules of the family that Jesus goes into. So the principle here is who you are. You are salt. You are light. You are a member of God's family. Jesus builds us up, and that's the main point. That's what I want you to grasp. That's the principle. But now I want to illustrate the principle with two stories. These stories, I like to use stories because they bring to life the principle. They modernize it. They put it in a modern context. So please listen carefully to these stories as illustrations of being a light to the world. The first story I want to tell you about, these are both true stories. A young man named Desmond Doss wanted to help in World War II. He was a devout Christian, and he was a Seventh-day Adventist. As a Seventh-day Adventist, he believed that it was wrong to kill others. He believed it was wrong to even hold a gun. Now, I might disagree with his philosophy there, but I respect it. I respect it. So he went into the military, into the army, with those convictions. And in boot camp, he was treated horribly. They called him a coward. They actually beat him. They mocked him. His captain ridiculed him, tried to get him kicked out. His captain even said, "You will never serve beside me." His captain hated him. And his life was like hell going through boot camp. But he didn't give up. He didn't quit. In fact, a military court ruled that he could go to battle without a gun, and that he went as a medic with his company. He ended up, this was 1945, he ended up at one of the bloodiest battles to ever take place in World War II. It was Hacksaw Ridge in Okinawa. It was a cliff. They had to scale the cliff after bombardment and take this area on top of the cliff, this ridge. And they were able to do that. They took the area, they took over control of it, but the Japanese had just gone down in the ground and were hiding, waiting, right? And so after a certain point, the Japanese re-attacked. And there was a bloody battle, and they were forced off that area and had to go back down the cliff. Many, many people were wounded. And Desmond was up there with them all. Now, he could have fled, but he decided that he would stay and do what a medic does. At night, he stayed there. The Japanese were going around killing any of the wounded survivors. They're going around. And with that danger, he decided, I am going to rescue people. And he figured out a rope system where he could lower someone down. And he took a wounded soldier, tied him up, and by himself, with no help, lowered this guy down. And someone down at the bottom untied him and then took him to get medical help. And then he'd pull the rope back up, and he'd search for another wounded soldier, and he'd tie him up, and he'd lower him down. And each time he says this, he prayed, Lord, help me get one more. It's the most dramatic story I think I've ever read. Lowers down the next guy. It was one, it was two, it was three. Lord, help me get one more. The Japanese are trying to kill him. At one point, he had to hide under dead bodies and pretend he was dead. And the Japanese walked right by him. It's an amazing story of courage, supernatural courage, all night long. He's lowering bodies down the cliff, lowering Hacksaw Ridge, lowering them down, and one by one, all night long, this supernatural energy and courage with all the danger around him. This is going to be unbelievable. He saved 75 men from that battlefield that would have been slaughtered, wounded men. He even saved some Japanese, lowered them down. An amazing story. It doesn't end there, it goes on and on, but I just wanted to share with you, he brought light to the darkness. He was injured himself, but just kept going. The next day, the men so respected him, knowing what he'd done, they would not go to battle without him. He had totally won their respect over. And after praying, he said, okay, we'll go now. And one of the days following, some Japanese came out from hiding, threw a hand grenade at the group he was at. In midair, he kicked the hand grenade away and saved his own life and the lives of those around him. He lived to tell the story. It's an amazing story. He was highly honored and decorated for his actions. Never carried a gun, just saved lives, saved people's lives. That's bringing light to the darkness. And that's loving. Oh, he even saved the life of the captain. The captain who tried to get him kicked out. He saved the captain's life. How ironic. He lived for Christ. Now, you might not have a dramatic story like that, but you're going to face similar things. You're going to be put in a situation where maybe a neighbor or a coworker is being so mean to you. And how are you going to treat them back? You're going to follow Jesus. You're going to be nice and kind and build them up and encourage them. You're going to repay good for evil. That's what Jesus tells us to do. You're going to bring light to the darkness. You might be in a situation at school or at work or wherever you are where it just seems all this craziness is going on around you, but you are just going to be calm, loving, and just keep loving and keep loving and keep loving. That's what Jesus calls us to do. I want to share one more illustration. Again, these illustrations are to motivate us to be salt and to be light. This is a story that I want to share with you about a woman who I've met and gotten to know. She's from Canada. Her name is Dorothy Greatex. I met her because our church in Nevada went on a mission trip every year to Mexico. This mission was located in Baja, California, in the town of Vicente Guerrero. And it's an amazing mission, an orphanage, and they did all this ministry, and we would go down there for a week and live there and serve with the mission. Now, a secondary mission that was started by Dorothy in the same town was a woman's shelter. Dorothy had actually been at that first mission as the cook and baker. But she found out about these young women and even girls, teenage girls, that were being highly abused. I can't tell you the kind of abuse, but you can imagine. Highly, horribly abused, and they had nowhere to go. Some of them would end up in jail. But when they'd be released from jail, they had nowhere to go. And they'd have to go back to this life of hell. And she said, this isn't right. I can't stand for this. I must do something. And so she left from being the cook and the baker to being, with no experience, running a woman's shelter. It's called New Beginnings. I've been there many times. I've heard this story from her several times. Dorothy said when she first started this shelter for women, the first woman, a young woman that was brought to her, was so wounded, so emotionally and physically broken that she couldn't hardly do anything. Dorothy would ask her to help out, like clean the house. Could you sweep this room? She would sweep for a few minutes and then just stare out the window for hours. She would just sit in a chair, staring. She'd been so hurt and wounded, she couldn't function. And she'd say, I need some help with making dinner or setting the table or doing this. She would help for like a few minutes, but then she couldn't do any more, and she'd just stare, just in a daze. Well, other women and children came into the house there, the women's shelter, and it became very busy. Dorothy is a type A personality, really active, doing all kinds of stuff. So it was growing and growing, and all these women and children were a part of this. But this woman, I'm going to call her Mary. Mary, that wasn't her real name, but I'll just call her that. Mary would just not help. She would just be dazed, just staring out the window for hours. And so all these activities was coming. And Dorothy, one day, got a call from a pastor, a local pastor. And he said, the police and I have rescued a young mother with 2 children. Will you take them in? They have nowhere to go. And she said, of course. Just bring them to the street, and I'll go out the door, and we'll bring them in. Now, as Dorothy tells this a lot better than I could, I've heard this story from her several times, and I always tear up. I'm going to try to get through this. This always makes me cry. But what she can describe, because she was there, is way better than what I can describe. But what happened was Dorothy went out to the car to get this mother and 2 young children. One child was about 1 year old. The other was about 3 years old. Mother, 2 young children. As she went out to the car to bring them into the home, Mary, the woman who couldn't function, who was just in oblivion, followed her. Followed behind her. Dorothy didn't even know it. Followed her out. Dorothy comes to the car. They open up the car door, and she, first of all, smelled. These kids had not been taken care of weeks, maybe months. They reeked of urine and their own excrement. They had not been cleaned. It was caked onto them. The smell was so atrocious. The sight of them, filthy, dirty, full of sores, diseases, lice, abuse. The mother was the same, just full of bruises and disease and lice and all kinds of, just a shock to see it. And she was so shocked. She'd never seen even animals treated this horribly. She was just stunned, and she couldn't move. She just stood there in total shock, taking in the picture. But Mary came from behind and just went right over to those children, grabbed them up in her arms with the stinking diseases, sores on them, everything. Didn't matter. And Mary just lovingly said, you're safe now. And she led the mom and these 2 children into the home. Dorothy now just following, unsure what to do, unsure what was going on, still in shock. And this Mary just took over and started cleaning them. It took hours to clean all the filth, the disease, the sores, and gave them food and gave them clothes and just started loving them and caring for them and welcoming them into a safe home. The beautiful thing about this story is that Mary, through taking care of someone that was hurting worse than her, got healed. She got healed of her wounds and her pain. And she became one of the most helpful people to Dorothy ever, because she could understand what they'd gone through. She'd been through it herself. And she showed this compassionate love and care for these wounded children and this wounded young mother. And they were part of the family of God in that woman's shelter. I am so thrilled with that story because it's a great example of being salt, of being light in a very dark place. And that's what Jesus calls us to do. It's who we are, and it's what we do. Amen.